What's going on, guys? Coach Gaglione here. It's another edition of the Powerlifting with the People podcast. I'm your host, Coach Gaglione. Got Trevor on the line today. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Thank
Good.
you for having me.
Yeah, so it's been cool. So I think I can't remember if we first crossed paths at one of the Raw Unities or if it was one of the first US Opens. It was either one of the two, and I'm sure maybe like might have had more interaction in one or the other, but it's been quite some time. So it was cool to see you. A couple, I guess, last weekend, or I'm losing track of time because I'm in so many.
This is a problem I can relate to. I know that it's like squat day, bench day, deadlift day, and meet day. That's all I know at most times.
There you
So
go.
yeah, I have to leave little reminders and notes for myself as well. I think you're right. I think we were in the same room at Raw Unity 7. And I know we were in the same room at US Opens, but I don't think we actually had a conversation, I think, until the XPC when I was there with Stacy. So she had competed on Friday, and then we were there. People were lifting on Saturday. We're sitting next to each other, just having a conversation in between, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we are having a conversation Friday. She competed Saturday, but that was the first time I think we actually had a chance to talk. Which is, you met me at that point in time where I was averaging like 3 or 4 hours of sleep by that night, taking care of athletes, doing things. You know how that goes. Like
Yeah.
there's so many fires you have to put out on a meet weekend, so you don't have a lot of brain power for conversations, but everybody wants to have one.
It's so funny, but
So thank you for not judging me for my lack of mental clarity in that moment.
no, well, I always tell people too, like whether I'm directing a meet, coaching, or like lifting. Sometimes when I have my game face on, it's like kind of different. I'm just kind of really like focused and fixated like on like what the task at hand is and all that. And I could definitely appreciate that. But yeah, no, it was cool to like kind of be back in Florida. It's kind of like been a minute. I've kind of come down for a couple of things. I mean, Raw Unity was like one of the kind of my personal favorites, and it was something I was kind of like following, just as a lifter myself. And then, like I said, I had the opportunity to kind of start kind of coaching some high level people, and I know like similar boat for you. So
Mhm.
I want to just get like a little bit of a quick background, because I know, like I said, this I know you've been kind of doing this a long time, as far as like kind of how you got into lifting, and then just kind of like what you got currently, either like what you're kind of doing as a coach right now or what you're working on as of late.
Absolutely. So I was that very stereotypical shy introverted kid who really appealed to the comic book characters and the action movies and Schwarzenegger, Stallone. Like they were confident, they were muscular, they had everything you could want as far as charisma and charm. So that appealed to me as a very young kid, being shy and introverted, and I was a lifelong insomniac. So if you grew up in the generation I did, like when ESPN2 came out, it was a different time. They were looking for extreme sports and obscure sports outside of football, basketball, baseball. So they started showing things like World's Strongest Man, powerlifting, arm wrestling, and that really appealed to me, the strength aspect more so than the bodybuilding aspect. They had bodybuilding shows too. They used to have like Flex Magazine workout, and I remember there was another one that like was done in Gold's Gym that would talk to all the bodybuilders there and showcase their workouts and stuff. And I would watch that. I was enamored by their size and their appearance, and so I was devouring anything I could that was bodybuilding related at the time, because there really wasn't a lot of strength related material in bookstores. Like you had to go out of your way to find that. The internet wasn't really prevalent yet. So I started off really consuming a lot of bodybuilding content, bodybuilding material, bodybuilding books, Schwarzenegger's Education of a Bodybuilder. And upon that, I came across Fred Hatfield's Bodybuilding a Scientific Approach, which was very, very, very different from every bodybuilding application at the time, because he was talking about compensatory acceleration training, which, there are different variations of it: ballistic, dynamic method, effort method, compensatory acceleration. And basically, he was talking about moving the concentric rep as fast as humanly possible. This really didn't belong in a bodybuilding book per se, but it opened my eyes to a different field of training and periodization and programming, which for my 15, 16-year-old mind made zero sense. I would see the application of 3x5 at 70%. And I thought I had to get by like 70% by the third set. So I would do like the bar, a quarter, and like a plate as like my 75% is like 15, and be like, okay, I'm done. I didn't realize that was 3 sets at that weight at that time. There was no one explaining these things to you, and you had to figure it out on your own. So there was a lot of self-discovery, experimentation, and then the internet kind of explored and took off. So I was watching Ed Cohn on the Mountaineer Cup. That was one of my most like inspiring moments. I remember being 11 years old, scared of my shadow, antisocial, and Ed Cohn stands up with 881, walks out, and you probably remember this. Immediately, his nose starts bleeding, and he kind of just like licks his lips, takes a breath, dunks it, and comes back up and smiles. And I just remember thinking, I want to be that guy. I want that kind of confidence and the ability to not be rattled and unshook. And so I've been chasing it ever since I was 11, but there wasn't a lot of information. So I basically did a bodybuilding thing. And then I was literally too introverted and shy to put on a singlet. I wanted the power lift. I wanted the power lift bad. I was told I'd be good at it. And I was strong because I could squat a lot and deadlift somewhat okay. And I was like, there's no way I'm putting on a singlet. So I ended up doing strongman first because you can wear whatever you want. So I started in strongman, and through the grace of God, I kind of got hooked up with Heath Allison, who's a pro strongman. Back then, there was only the North American Strongman Corporation; they hadn't split yet. So he lived in my same county. I lived in Broward County, which is where Fort Lauderdale is. He lived in Fort Lauderdale, and I lived in the suburb area. So I would drive like 40 minutes every Sunday for years. Sorry, every Saturday, and train with him in his garage. There were multiple lessons there. One, yes, this is a brute strength sport, but it's very much technique driven because you're wasting a lot of energy if you're not very technical and you're making it harder on yourself. So that was something he drove in. And then also structure, because he was following a modified conjugate structure for his strongman. So I went from a more push pull split bodybuilding style to creating more of a structure. And that was my first introduction really to a conjugate methodology of training multiple things at one time. So we would do it. It was haphazardly thrown together, but there was a structure to it. It was kind of like a group dynamic. What do you want to be our dynamic press today? What do you want to be our max effort deadlift today kind of thing, variation? And we would like group consult, but it was the introduction. And I quickly realized that your training has to be specific to the task at hand because I let go of a lot of bodybuilding movements to focus on things that built my event training. Being able to lap a stone, being able to shoulder a stone, being able to move a sandbag, being able to walk with it. So the training started to change, and I realized that there are more specific needs based off the athlete because you couldn't just do basic bodybuilding movements and look like a bodybuilder and lift like a powerlifter at the same time. You had to be a little bit more specific. So my evolution started in that process, and I was just hungrier and hungrier. And at the same time, the internet was really taking off. And I got introduced to people like yourself who was explaining conjugate as you learned it from other people. And there was people sharing Louis' wisdom and Westside. Dave Tate was putting out tremendous stuff. And I was applying it, and some of it was working, but a lot of it wasn't. And the reason why a lot of it wasn't working, it's not that it was wrong, is that they're teaching and applying geared mechanics. And the sport was becoming raw as far as powerlifting concerned. And sitting back wide into a squat doesn't give you the best depth. It just gives you the best leverage. So you had to find the middle ground. And about that time, I had severely destroyed my back when I was doing strongman. Ended up in a hospital. And it was sold in spine surgery. I declined it and started rehabbing. This was almost 12 and a half years ago now. And I'd come across, at the time, a very relatively unknown man out of Canada, Stu McGill. He became much more known thanks to Brian Carroll in the community and putting that out there, the gift of injury. But at the time, it's just a video with him with a spine mold discussing spines and disc mechanics and the whole nine, and his idea on spinal stability and hip ability to create leverage there. And I began Father's Day weekend leaving the hospital working on that. And I realized I needed more mobility. I started weightlifting. So I started learning the snatch, the clean and jerk. And the programming methodology was exceptionally different than powerlifting. It was much more sub max, much more higher volume, much more technical variations, segments of the lifts, the whole nine. And I noticed that even though I wasn't intentionally doing that with my power lifts, my squat went up, my deadlift went up because I was getting better and more positionally aware of where my body was moving in space. And I'm like, how can I apply this to powerlifting? And so I started putting out content of mobility movements, stability movements, pattern movements, position builders, which was very different content at the time with people who were just putting out basic program structures. Here's how I squat. Here's how I bench. Here's how I deadlift. And I quickly realized because I was already working with so many different clients and I already had 15 years of training experience as a trainer and as a gym owner that everyone's built differently. So that's really how my name got out there is I was using a lot of weightlifting cues like the thoracic extension video for powerlifting. I don't believe too many people were teaching leading with thoracic extension at the time I was putting that video up because I was working with Bridgeford. And Bridgeford and I were talking about it, and I put the video up. I still had the mohawk, the blonde mohawk in my garage. That video just like took off and went viral. Andy Kwong, the huge Asian guy, had like shared it and stuff like that. I was like, nobody ever taught deadlifts this way, starting from the top, not the bottom. And so that's the difference maker that really propelled my career upwards was teaching in a way that was more digestible and understandable that anyone can grasp this and become better because we focus on their physical awareness first and let the strength build second as their form grow, which you see the sport has taken to a lot of with DUP programs. High frequency programs have that methodology, build the skill, the strength will follow.
Yeah, that's kind of one thing I've kind of noticed with some of your, whether it be just exercise tutorials and stuff like that. It's really kind of funny how Just like the pendulum has swung so far from, I guess like what some of the like the West Side kind of people were kind of promoting in like the early 2000s to a lot of what's a little bit more popular, like I said, higher frequency, more specificity and stuff. But what I've kind of noticed with some of the, I guess, and you can kind of maybe talk about how you kind of, I guess, filter things out, or I guess how you categorize different movements. But some of like the accessory movements that you're doing, like obviously there's going to be some inherent like muscular benefit to like some of like
Yes.
but also I appreciate it. Like I come from like a wrestling and football background before I kind of focus primarily on powerlifting, where yeah, there's also like value in just kind of breaking down the movements and okay, this is like working this aspect of the lift, and that was something I appreciate. Like whether it's and again, I don't know if you call it, the Jaffe extensions, or if you're grabbing those and just kind of just working on your, your kind of starting position, working your lower back strength, hip mobility, whatever the reason behind some of those drills, I can kind of see the application where it's okay. Well, you could obviously, just do like a basic bodybuilding movement on a machine that's a little bit more general, or you could do something that has some specificity, but also it's kind of taking a segment of the lift. So I don't know if you want to comment on any of that specific exercise, or just maybe
Sure.
your thought process on okay, like how you're maybe kind of I guess piecing these movements together, and how it
Right.
kind of fits into like the program as a whole.
Sure. So you've watched hundreds of thousands of athlete videos at this point, and you can see an energy leak or breakdown. Say, for example, someone wants to deadlift, and immediately when they deadlift, their hips shoot up and back, and their neck shoots up. They've gotten out of position. It's a harder lift. And you're like, why is that happening? Well, there's two reasons. One, they either have improper tension of the bar, so they don't create lat tension to be able to wedge in, or they don't know to wedge in, so they think they just have to lift the bar, so they lift it by any means necessary. So they haven't become positionally aware. So my original video was modifying the seated good morning by using plates and shifting forward instead of the chair deadlift, which is learning how to thoracically extend and sit back. If you're in gear, you're going to sit back into the gear to leverage out the floor. You'd be stupid necessarily not to until you learn a better position. Because I know some people like Daniel Chinagero were talking about that. He used to sit back into his gear to leverage it, but he would really struggle after the floor break. He learned to pull a little bit more like a raw lifter, letting his hips come in, not relying on the suit. He's back over 800, no problem. So I talked about that because the chair deadlift taught sitting back and away from the bar. And in raw, that's a no-no. You deleverage yourself. You want to be into the bar as close as possible. The closer your hips, the better leverage you have. So my original video was seated good mornings with the plates, emphasizing after the thoracic, shifting forward. Johnny Kaufman saw it, thought it was great. He started calling them the Jaffe extensions. I got a lot of pushback on that. I'm like, bro, I didn't name them, man. I'm not that pretentious.
Yeah, for sure.
But the internet did, and Johnny's very prolific, so it took off. And they went everywhere. And the second people grasp the movement, they're like, it makes so much sense now. Even for a conventional lifter, I want them to learn how to wedge forward into the weight, create better leverage. So I still use it because it's one of the better positional builders. The plates are constantly moving. You have to adduct and squeeze together. So you're locking in your back tension. And then we're focusing on the thoracic extension leading the way. So when you come up, you're in position. Right away, it's teaching you to lock into a starting position, have full tension, and engage. We pause there so you become aware of where your starting position is, what your starting tension is. It's just a teaching tool that you can load progressively over time. And it enhanced Johnny's ability to wedge forward. And so he liked it. Obviously, he took his deadlift over 900, which was spectacular. And so it just kind of passed around and took off. But it's the same thing I was teaching 11 years ago as cervical retraction, thoracic extension. But now I've added in the component of creating back tension with it. I just progressed the cues to a loaded movement that seemed to work for me, that I shared and have worked for so many other people. I just saw somebody sent me a video. Somebody was teaching a tutorial on the Jaffe extension in like Egypt. And I was like, that's so cool. That's just really cool that it's like worldwide now. Because I'm like, I'm just this weirdo who loves to lift. So it's kind of cool that that's spread around, and people who don't even follow me are doing tutorials on the Jaffe extension. I was like, that's weird, but cool. But it was a matter of I've competed in strongman, I've competed in weightlifting, I've competed in powerlifting. So I have a lot of awareness and different programming styles, different exercise structures, different exercise selections. It's kind of like if you look at like a Laura Phelps or a Louis Simmons or a Dave Tate, they have an encyclopedia of special exercises, corrective exercises. And I have the same, but it's garnered more around biomechanics and movement than it is a system. So I don't use a conjugate or a linear or a DUP system. I blend aspects of all. A beginner is going to need more frequency so they can learn awareness, patterns, and positions. But once they get exceptionally strong, that frequency starts to hurt them more than help them. because they can't recover from those loads and the volume at those frequencies. And the one that's going to break you down the most is the barbell. So when you have 80% barbell work and DUP works, it's hard to sustain that for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I've been competing over 20 years now and lifting for 30. I'm a unicorn in this sport. Most people, the attrition rate is 50% are gone in 5. And some of that is because DUP is kind of like Bulgarian light. It's a lot of high threshold work and high frequency. And the mental aspect is what burns you out because it's boring. You don't have a lot of variations. You don't have much to look forward to. You're basically high bar squatting, tempo squatting, pause squatting, squatting. You're benching, close grip benching, Larson pressing, you're deadlifting and you're pause deadlifting, and like that's it. If you're lucky, you get a tertiary day where you do curls, lateral raises, and pull downs. There's not a lot to it, so it's very monotonous. Conjugate is not great for the beginner. It is in the fact that there's a lot of accessory work so they can help them add muscle mass and coordination, but they're only doing 20% barbell work, and it's variations of the barbell work and accommodating resistance. And so it's so overdone by a lot of people that a beginner doesn't thrive because they don't get the physical awareness. Linear, its drawback is you don't know if it's working for 12, 16, 18 weeks. So you can be spinning your wheels all this time without any idea. If you have found a way to condense them all together, which is what I do, I've always called it accelerated blocks, because I talk about this on the Elite FTS podcast. I would notice when I would give someone a new block, their adjustment was in 2 weeks. So it's like if they've adjusted to the block within 2 weeks and the block is 5, then we're not getting as much from the next 3 weeks as we were from the first 2. So I started putting things in a linear format, but phased in very short cycles, 1 week, 2 weeks. So instead of having a block of hypertrophy, a block of strength, and a block for peaking, they were doing all 3 in one block, a la conjugate. But instead of a weekly microcycle, it was still across that 5 weeks. So it's 2 weeks hypertrophy, 2 weeks strength, 1 week peak, deload, start again. And I can manipulate that format depending on how far or how close they are to a meet. So it gave me conjugate flexibility with linear periodization, but the ability to throw in the frequency of DUP to help an athlete progress faster. Sometimes that frequency isn't the barbell lift. Sometimes it's mobility movements, accessory movements, corrective movements. For example, somebody has a desk job and they sit forward all day on a computer and their shoulders are always hurting. Part of their frequency is if they're in the gym 4 days a week, they might be doing McLeod flies 4 days a week because it's going to open up their external rotation of the shoulder and mobilize that. That could be done in frequency. And people don't think that way. They only think in frequency of squat, bench, deadlift. But I think in frequency of need. If they need more squats, I'll give them more squats, but I'm taking something else away. If they need more mobility, I'm going to taper back on the squats and give them more mobility so they get into a better position. What's the individual athlete's needs? And that's the system you create around the athlete rather than having one system mindset of everyone does conjugate, everyone does DP, everyone does linear, because someone's missing in all of that.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's well said. I know, like from like what I've seen, I know like to your point, one of the drawbacks as far as like a lot of us were doing in the early 2000s, where we were like you said, having a little bit too much variety, and then we weren't really skillful. Because that's like one thing I was kind of to your point, like I was a lot stronger in my like early to mid 20s in terms of like just like I could do good mornings with 600 pounds, but again it's like we're not in a good morning contest, so it's kind of like it's great, it's like you're getting like very like brutally strong, but sometimes I was whether I was just too heavy or whatever, wasn't good a shape, I wasn't like always, I wouldn't have like the best performances like on a meet day. And as I got like older and like hopefully wiser, like my absolute strength was less, but I hit a lot of my best totals in like my mid 30s and stuff like that. My best meet performances, best dots, Wilks, whatever formulas you want to use, kind of came like later on. Even though like my individual lifts might have been like down, the totals were up. More percentage of lifts were made. Just getting a little bit more skillful. And I think, kind of like I said, blending the multiple approaches together, I think is something that's not always used. And one of the things that like I've kind of seen at least a little bit more on like kind of like the tested side is that there seems to be a very much in favor of maybe just too much specific movements. And to your point, we've probably seen like a lot of people, coaches, athletes, different types of programs kind of come and go. So as far as like if you're getting someone that's maybe new, and maybe they're not really sure like where to start, like where do you kind of start someone that's just like very new to like lifting, and how do you kind of get someone going? And like there's so much information out there, so like where do you kind of start people that are coming in?
It's funny that you said that, because I look back and I laugh and I'm like, my abilities exceeded my education in my 20s. And as now I'm in my 40s, my education exceeds my abilities as my body's declining. Struggle's real. But you're exactly right. It is tricky when you're starting someone new, especially when they're brand new. because all they really need is motor power work.
Yeah.
The two ways you're going to get stronger is laying contractile tissue, which takes a long time, or improving neuromuscular efficiency, which takes a short time. The coordination happens with skill practice. That's where frequency really comes into play very quickly. So I would rather than do, if it's brand new lifter, I'm going to have them usually do a proprioceptive movement first and cue certain specific things and give them the compound movement second. Meaning by that is like I might have a brand new lifter who wants to powerlift, who's never powerlifted, have them do a pause goblet squat so they can feel out bracing, the anterior core loading. Zercher squat is fine for this too. Pause goblet squat is fine for this too, because it's going to give them automatic anterior core. Like I want you to pay specific attention to how your trunk feels. That's what we need to do is learn to lock in that trunk when you're squatting, when you're deadlifting. And so I want you to have this awareness first. So I might even tempo it. I don't need it to be like 3x15. I don't want it to be exhausting. I want it to be the other way around. I want it to be more like inverted volume, 5x3 with a 5-second eccentric tempo, because I'm teaching them how to move before they get into the bar. And that's what's lost for a lot of people is they go, here's the bar, have fun, and then they cue you. But I'm like, here's the movement. Let's learn the thing of called bracing. Let's put you under the bar, and then we cue you again. But now you're aware of bracing. So it's starting with that. And I would rather start with too low of a volume than too high of a volume for a beginner. I want them to finish their first workout, usually be like, okay, I could probably handle more, as opposed to, holy shit, I've never done all that work before. Because I'm like, that's on me. I didn't take the information they gave me, and I gave them too much. I would rather grow in time than overdo it for them and freak them out and think I have to do all this, because it is overwhelming to a new person. They're listening to podcasts like this, and they have to learn about their sleep schedule. They have to learn about their nutrition schedule. They have to learn how to count macros. They have to learn about periodization models. They have to learn warm-ups, isolated stretches, dynamic stretches, PNF. Like there's so much that is normal to us because we interact with it every day that is overwhelming to them. So my first task for them is, hey, weeks 1 and 2, I don't want you to, if you're brand new, I don't want you to strain and struggle. I want you to be aware of your positions and patterns. And we're going to talk about that because that's the hardest thing for you to learn is how to move well with the bar. I'm going to prioritize that above all else. And then each week, if they handle things, I'm going to add a set, add some load, give them more cues and so forth. But I want to start in that baby step process of crawling before they're walking and before they're running. So positional movement. Same thing with the bench press. You might find this like with female clients specifically, they don't necessarily have the motor control of their upper body that a men would have because they haven't used it as much. If they played sports, they might. If they didn't, and you have a brand new one, you've got to teach them how to do a push-up before you can teach them how to do a bench press. Because if they can't stabilize their body, that bar is going to go everywhere. And you see it. And if you give them 10-pound dumbbells, they're going everywhere. Teach them how to control themselves down to the floor. Up is the easy part. The control is the hard part. So eccentric work and tempos and yielding methods are your best bet with beginners so they can learn positional awareness as fast as possible.
Yeah. Are there any other kind of movements that you like as far as, so I think that like, I'm kind of with you here. And I think one of the things that I guess I'm a little bit more unique is that I have that like sports kind of strength and conditioning
Yes.
background. I still kind of work with some wrestlers and stuff here and there. I got one kid that's and he's going to Maryland next year and doing really well. And I think especially when it comes to those types of athletes, I kind of like learned, okay, especially those types of athletes, they don't need to do like a barbell squat, right? So trying to figure out like whether they're drills or exercises where they're kind of like kind of self-correcting in a way. So you kind of mentioned like the front-loaded squat's going to inherently kind of give them a little bit of more of a natural bracing ability. So are there any kind of like movements, I
Oh
guess,
yeah.
like
I always
that?
joke and call it the prison pump plan. So push-ups, pull-ups, inverted rows, single leg box squats, all these things teach you your physical awareness. So any calisthenic movement, I'm drawing a blank on his name. I feel so bad. You know him, the wrestler, always hyped up, wrestles. He had a blog forever. It was super popular, and he taught business coaching, underground strength.
Oh, Zach Givenesh.
Thank you, Zach Evanesh. One of the first things he talks about, doesn't care what the caliber of wrestler is. The first thing he does is he makes him like crawl, run, skip, jump, climb upstairs on their hands and knees. Because if you're a wrestler, you have to have that spatial awareness. And he's like, that's more important than how strong you are is your spatial awareness, because that's where your skill's coming from. And then we can work on your conditioning and again, get stronger after that. I like that mindset. So I was very enamored with strength and conditioning coaches, strength and conditioning programs, more so than powerlifting coaches, powerlifting programs when I came in there, because they're working with athletes that are $1 million athletes, $100,000 athletes. Like their work matters. they're not like, oh, you had a bad meet, it's okay, we'll come back. It's like you lost the football season, you're fired.
Yeah.
Their work matters so much more. Not that someone's goals doesn't matter, but so I look at how they structure the volume? How do they structure the approach? And you can see this. There's a great book called The System, which deals with conjugate programming for football, basketball, baseball, group things. So it's not bands and chains, but you'll see there's certain movements they give to positional players that others don't have because it's the demands of their sport. And I look at it the same way as, yes, our demands are squat, bench, and deadlift. It's all in the same sagittal plane. We don't move around that. But to have a healthy structural body that's going to sustain for 20 years, I want you to rotate. I want you to be able to hinge. I want you to be able to turn, crawl, duck. I want you to be able to support your spine. And I know this from the injuries I've had over the years when this information wasn't out there. It was a tight muscle is a strong one back 20 years ago. And now it's a tight muscle is an injury waiting to happen. A mobile muscle is a strong one because you can move better. So yes, the mindset and the philosophy has definitely changed as information has come out there. And so I've always looked at myself as, okay, how can I distill this so everybody can understand it? Because the information you have and the information I have at a level makes sense to us, but we deal with it every day. They don't. So I make it, my content is like really bite-sized, digestible chunks that are like 2 or 3 minutes that you can content do it anywhere. And they're not produced. They're not microphone. They're just like in the gym. I have clients with this problem. You might have it too. Here, let me help you. That kind of thing. And so I like to use that mindset even with my coaching. So if I'm communicating to an athlete, they don't read the books I read. They don't listen to the podcasts I read. So I have to put it into their language and I have to simplify it as much as possible. I remember I put a content piece up and a DPT messaged me privately, very upset about what I had said. You're like, you can't just tell people to do this. It's irresponsible. I'm like, no, I didn't prescribe anything. I didn't tell them they had to. And I didn't say, this is your problem. I said, if you're doing something and you have this symptom, you might want to try this and test and apply and see how it works. I'm like, I gave no recommendation other than test and apply and see if it works. I didn't say do this. And she like backtracked a little bit. She's like, well, I guess you're right. I was like, are you upset that I give people information or are you upset that they're not coming to you? They're coming to me. You should backtrack even more because like, that's really what it was. People don't like that I put free information, free content and helpful things out there. But I'm like, I can only help so many people personally with my clientele, but I want to help many more. And I'm sorry that makes you feel insecure, but I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to put that information out there. I'm still going to help you, but I never tell anyone they have to do anything. I try to avoid dogmatic approaches as much as possible because my approach now is different than my approach 5 years ago. And it's different than my approach 5 years before that. You're always going to learn, evolve, and change. And so is the athlete. The athlete's going to learn, evolve, and change. And I just had a conversation with one of the trainers in the gym today about that because she was talking about what she wants to talk about at a seminar. And I was like, just remember that everybody at the seminar is not at your level. They don't understand that. They're at this level, speak their language. I'm like, every time you work with a client and they ask you a nutrition question, that's content basically for you because if that client has that problem, other people have that problem. And it's really simple for you to say, here's a solution for that problem, try it. Simple as that. And that's all I've done. And it started off 10-ish years ago. I got tired of posting my training and listing numbers. It was really boring to me because I don't use that as my training log. And like some people are like, week 1, 3, day 4. And it's like, that's so lame. No one's paying attention. I was like, here's my warm-ups. Here's my mobility. And I would notice because I had a professional account. One of my clients talked me into making my page professional and you get metrics. How many people shared it? How many people saved it? And I would see like a training video, and it'd be like saved twice, shared 3 times for whatever reason. I started putting these warm-up drills and things I was doing. All of a sudden I saw like 500 shares and 300 saves. I was like, whoa, people really want to learn these things. So I just started doing that. And I was like, here you go. And it took off. It grew my business. It grew the awareness in the sport. I think it's funny when I'll go to a meet and I'll hear a coach shout a cue and has no idea it's from me. Like, that's cool. Thank you. It makes my day. I don't go over there and say, hey, you know who invented that? I don't do that. I just find it really endearing that the message has gotten out there because that was always the goal. Because when you and I were coming up, information was so much harder to find.
Yeah.
You would have to order textbooks from human kinetics to get this kind of information. And you can only learn so much from a book. There wasn't videos of people doing biomechanics courses. PRI wasn't a thing. People weren't talking about the angle of your diaphragm and, diaphragmatic breathing and expansion. You can look back 25 years ago and Louis was still teaching to arch your back and push your belly out, which puts you into your anterior tilt, which most people thought everyone should do that. But he was speaking to his multiply powerlifters specifically because that was specific to sitting into their gear for the squat. And so people took that verbatim and started cueing that around gyms everywhere. Louis does this, you're going to do this. Like, that guy's not in gear. That's not how this works. And that's the disconnect that I've always found with social media and information is who is it applying to? So I try and be very clear. This is for raw powerlifting. This is for shoulder mobility. This is for structural integrity, whatever. This is a position builder. I try and be very precise and clear. Like, this is what this nugget is for. I don't do these long 60-minute diatribe videos breaking things down tutorials because most people don't pay attention to that. I have on average 85 to 90 clients on any given day at all times. And I would say about 20 of them also coach, and they read that same material because they coach. None of the ones who coach are looking at that material, care to understand it. They trust that I do. And that's my job. So I put it out there and make sure I constantly learn. And that's what I do for the beginners. I make sure they understand that, hey, there's a lot of information out here. You might want to consider this as well. I'm not saying you have to, but you may want to consider this and try it, test it, apply it. If you like it, use it and share it. Simple as that.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff there I wanted to kind of touch on for the listeners. So I think that like going back to one thing you said really recently, like kind of the arching your back thing, right? Because I think a lot of us were kind of, I've even done stuff with Mark Ripito and things like that, and then it's like you're really getting like such varying informations on technique models and stuff like that. And I think also too, like understanding, like you said, who's the audience, like who you're talking to. So if you have like I at my peak, I was a 340 pound super heavyweight equipped power lifter. So like me like arching my back is going to look a lot different than like,
Yes.
a 123 pound, like some of like, the girls that you were coaching back in the day that were like, if you're a lightweight female who's got like a ton more mobility, and they don't have this suit to brace into,
Mhm.
the result of the cue is going to be completely different. So if the cue gets the athlete to the position that you want them to be, then it's a good cue for them. But a cue might be a different result depending on the person who's hearing it, who's that cue for. So I think to your point, just saying like, hey, this is something that kind of worked for me. Go and try it and see like what the result is. I think that's a really good approach where you're not kind of guaranteeing it's going to work or anything like that, or that you have to do this thing. But this is something I kind of found. This was a solution I found to this problem. And I think if you kind of like look at it that way, because like I said, there's everyone's so different in their bodies, what's going to kind of work for them. So for people, I guess that are maybe, I guess maybe they're looking to maybe transition from athlete to coach and things like that. What advice do you have for people that may be like, I don't know, if maybe they're trying to write their first program for the first time, or maybe they're starting to kind of work with some athletes. I guess anything that you kind of see that maybe can help people kind of get started on more like the coaching side of things.
Okay, that's a great one because that's a question I get so often is what book should I read? What author should I follow? And I kind of always laugh at that. I was like, do you want to have one opinion? Do you want to have
Right.
one viewpoint? This was an argument Chad Wesley Smith made years ago. He talked about like if you only follow Louis or if you only follow Bondarchuk or if you only follow Shako, they're all reading the same material and it's their interpretation of it. They're
Yeah.
all reading the same scientific studies and they have a different extrapolation of how the data works because they all reference the same sources, but they
Those-
have different opinions.
Yep.
So I like to have a very diverse background. Like I said, I like to follow a lot of strength conditioning coaches who are getting absolutely paid to protect an athlete because that's my goal as a coach is not just help you excel but protect. So I would say first things foremost is understand the intention of the material. For example, you mentioned Ripito. Ripito is around when the world was predominantly single ply, still teaches what I would consider single ply mechanics with the way he teaches the hip drive for the squat, the whole nine instead of loading the quads. But his books on programming happen to be exceptionally good.
Yep.
The programming concepts haven't changed exceptionally much, except for maybe the frequency and exercise selection, but the programming concepts are fundamental. So his book, Practical Programming, is great. If you wanted to learn programming, that's probably where I would start. I also really like a lot of Charles Poliquin's work because he goes over many different formats of programming and strength conditioning, and you can take and apply a lot of those. But I always tell people like understand the intention. He was dealing with endurance athletes. Like he writes programs that would say 4x4 at 85% with 60 seconds rest. I don't know a single powerlifter alive who can do that. But he was working with alpine skiers who have to have 3 to 5 minutes of sustainable muscular endurance. They can do that. Their 85% squat max is going to be very different than my 85% squat max. My recovery is going to be different. My cardiovascular system is different. So, like I said, you have to look at it from a grain of salt. But the loading isn't necessarily wrong. Like that's a very high threshold, high volume loading, 4x4, 85%. But a powerlifter is probably going to take 3 to 5 minutes between those sets to get it done. The alpine skier can do it in 60 seconds. Vastly different group and intention. But the programming concepts are still there. He has great concepts on exercise selection. He has great concepts on biomechanics. There's a book in front of me called like Agile Periodization or something like that, where he goes over every periodization structure from and study from like 1960s. It's a very dry read, but Chris Beardsley's Strength is Specific is one of the best books I've read on the topic of strength discussion, because he's literally looking at the science, how they have tested it, what their findings was, and how he feels about the opinion. And you can, so even things like whether a hip thrust helps a sprinter versus a pull through helps a sprinter from, he starts getting into force vectors. And that's really, really important to understand. Like training a push up doesn't build your bench press. Training the bench press builds your bench press, but training your push up builds the serratus and your shoulder structure and the stability for the bench press. So it's not a one-to-one carryover, it's a component of. And that's what you have to understand with force vectors. The force vector is the same. You're pushing away with the bench press, you're pushing down with the push-up, different force vector, but same muscles. So that's where the specificity comes in, and that's what you have to learn. Like, you can't lunge your way to a better squat. You have to squat your way to a better squat. But you can lunge your way to healthy adductors and glutes because of the mobility and the single leg stability. So those books are going to teach you that. The Muscle and Strength Pyramid, I'm trying to remember his name. The doctor, he got his PhD in New Zealand. He Helms. I can't remember his first name, but his last name's Helms. He does a lot of research and strength work.
And
Yep.
yeah,
He's predominantly a DUP guy, but his book is great because he goes over the hierarchy and priorities of programming, exercise selection, movements. Now, I would say take that book and then go on YouTube and look for international competitions that aren't American. We're very set in our ways. One of the ways I really dissected the deadlift and learned how to deadlift was watching the Russian like King of Kings lifts from the early 2000s as well, when you would have Belyaev and Milenichev was, of course, coming up at the time. Belyaev was 198. I'm trying to think of the 220 guy. Positive was 198. Belyaev was 220. But these guys, they sumo differently than American sumo. They weren't sitting their hips down. They were wedging their hips forward. They were pulling their chins back. Like I started noticing patterns and habits of how the Russians pulled, which was very similar to how the Finnish pulled. And the Finnish deadlifting program was variations, not the comp lifts until comp time. So that was also the weightlifting philosophy. That's why I say read weightlifting books as well, because they do things in segmented. They only train the full range once a week, but they did things in segmented and volume, so you can get better at that segment. The Finns did the same thing with their deadlift. So I was like very much a mutt with strength material that I could never recommend one source for someone. I would tell them, read international weightlifting programs, read international powerlifting programs, read strength and conditioning books. You should be having a book a month that you're going through, even though it's completely repetitive. The more repetitive it becomes, the better, because that means you recognize it, you understand it, you learn it, and you can speak it because it's repetitive. You're starting to recognize it in everybody. Because there are some things that are paramount. You're going to pick primary movements. You're going to pick position builders. You're going to pick things for structural imbalance or hypertrophy for specific muscles. You're going to pick warm-ups, and you start to create that system. Now, that's that. But I would combine the material with conversations. That conversation could be asking coaches what they do in the situation. You can hire one to consult and do things and how you do this, or you can listen to podcasts like this that you're doing, because you're literally bringing on athletes and coaches who do this every day. You're going to get insights into how they function, what they think, what they feel. I know I'm saying a lot of things, but that's what I want. I want to undersell and over deliver as much information as I can to the public. And I think that's something that people neglect, is you're a resource of information. You have probably 100 articles between like T-Nation, bodybuilding.com. You have several podcast episodes. There's going to be something that is an aha moment for a coach in these discussions, more so than the aha moment in the gym. The aha moment in the gym happens when you're an athlete. The aha moment as a coach happens when you're dissecting as much information as you can around the entirety of the sport, because you're like, that's the component I'm missing with this person. Let me apply it. Because we're all so diverse and we have individual needs. And if you're only reading one source, you only have one tool. I don't know anyone who builds a house with just a hammer.
Yeah, one of the other things I want to circle back to, you kind of glossed over to it, as far as some of your early training days, where it may sound like not a big deal, but I think for people like nowadays, I don't want to say we're a little bit more spoiled, but I think we're a little spoiled with the amount of powerlifting gyms, the access to meets, the access to information. I was kind of like you, where I would drive hours to for training, especially as an equipped lifter. You kind of it was a little bit more of a necessity, but yeah, I would drive an hour one way, 2 hours this way, you know, visited Elite FTS, visited Westside Barbell, like all those sorts of things. I took a lot of trips, and also, people like Mike Boyle and Cressy Performance. And when I was
Yes.
kind of working more athletes, I remember it was a snowstorm. I think it was like 2011, 2012. And I drove through like a snowstorm to do like a little observational internship at Cressy's and Mike Boyle's, just to kind of see, okay, well, how are they training these baseball players? And to your point, it's like, okay, these are $1 million arms. Like, okay, well, how are they strength training these guys? And there might be some insight there. because the level of detail and care that they're going to kind of take with a program like that. And then how can I extrapolate that? And then that was like one of the things
Yes.
a lot of people like asked me, like, like when I was working with Larry Williams, the best thing I kind of did for him was get him to the game day healthy. Like that was like kind of the most important factor. And then just kind of and I know you kind of had some similar situations. I don't
Yeah.
know if, with, I know like with, especially with Stacy Burr in particular, I know that she was having some lower back issues and stuff. And I know, it was kind of like, all right, let's just kind of get to the meet. And then I know like one of her like best performances, I don't know if that was like her last meet where she was having all those back issues, but I know that I think she mentioned, I don't know if we had the conversation or not. I know we were talking, but like she was pulling mostly sumo, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then you kind of flipped the script on game day. So I don't know if you want to maybe like just, I think that's a good story for people to hear, because I think one of the traps I see with younger lifters that are training ultra specific is then when they are injured, or like when they can't like do the competition movements, it's like, what do I do? And I think
Right.
that was a really good example of like, okay, well, this was not her like competition stance, but you guys made an adjustment, and it obviously worked considerably well. It doesn't always work out like that quite that well, but maybe that could be a cool story for
Yeah.
the listeners
The
to hear.
the guys were in our favor that day, and you mentioned Mike Boyle, which is great because I remember 2001, 2002. Mike Boyle says that no athlete should barbell low
Yeah.
bar back squat, and he
Yep.
shits from it and ensued from every powerlifter, and he wasn't wrong. He was saying that the low bar comp squat wasn't conducive to athletics, and so that shows you that having a diverse background is correct, because he was talking about a split squat being more first. Now, if you don't know Mike Boyle, you don't know he predominantly strength conditioning works for hockey players. Hip stability is absolutely paramount. So in his world, he's 100% right, and every powerlifter, of course, freaked out. But that goes to the point of what you said, is adapting to injuries and working around things. So when I first met Stacy, it was actually at the Gen meet in Florida, which is Jen Rotzinger, who was coaching at the time. And she was the greatest 114. She's broken just about every record you can have at 114. And she has her own meet. It was called the Jen. And Stacy came down there, was hanging out and asking me questions and wanted to know what I see. And then we're having dinner. And Stacy's at the time 26 years old. And she's rattling off all the pain, all the issues she had. And her coach at the time was doing a very butchered conjugate. It was 4-hour workouts, 5 days a week. I thought it was asinine. And one thing I looked at her when she's talking about, I was like, can you raise your hand above your head? And she goes, yeah. And she did, like, if you remember the Michael Keaton Batman in the rubber suit where he had to turn his whole body to turn, she did that with her arm. She goes like this. And I started laughing at him. I go, Stacy, no, you can't. I go, you don't need more programming. You don't need more heavy weights. You don't need more max effort. You need some fucking mobility in your life. And you need some trunk strength because you don't have any. And so I started working with her right on the spot right after that. And, within the first meet, she'd already grew her numbers and totals. We cut her work volume in half, literally work volume in half. And yet she was still missing lifts in the gym. And she couldn't understand why. It's because I made her do sub max weights for more volume. She had no conditioning, no volume level. She could just go in and do 1, 2, and 3 and be done and do a bunch of accessories and murder through it. But she didn't have trunk strength, trunk stiffness, and volume capability. So sub max weights pushed her through. She was getting fatigued, even though I gave her less work, which was cool because that adapted. And we worked her weakness. I went right to high bar, Zercher squats, core work. She didn't have any core, in my opinion. And yes, she started having back flare ups before the XPC, where she broke the all time dots. So about a month out, as well I do, at a month out, most of the building work, if not all the building work, is done. You just have to peak. So I knew she wasn't going to lose anything or maintain anything, but her back started flaring up because we were doing heavy squats in wraps for the getting ready for the meet. And she was in the range of 550, 565. She ended up squatting 565 at the XPC at 148, which is up until 2 years ago was the all-time world record. And she still owns the total world record, if I'm not mistaken, at 148 with 1435. And so as her back flared up, I knew that her sumo was relatively close to her conventional. There were like 15 pounds off. Her conventional at the time, meet PR was 528. Her sumo was like a 5'10" range. It was sloppy and ugly, but it was 5'10". It's like an 18-pound difference. I'm like, no problem. We'll just pull sumo because sumo didn't hurt. We ended up pulling sumo. We knew she was stronger conventional. And on meet day, she's like, my back doesn't hurt. Can I pull conventional? I'm like, absolutely. And we'd already decided that we're only going to take 8 attempts because she had it mentally in her mind. Her coach prior to her had told her she could never make a 30-10 deadlift because she had missed many. And I was like, that's just really shitty coaching to tell an athlete that. So I was like, okay, we're going to take whatever number you need on your second, and we're done in 8. And that became the mantra of the meet peak, was like done in 8, done in 8. We were hashtagging it the whole night, done in 8. And so that was a plan all the way up into the only part of the plan that changed on meet day was she said, my back doesn't hurt. Let's pull conventional. And then, of course, we hit the numbers we wanted to hit and needed to. She hit it on her second deadlift and we were done. And she has not powerlifted since. She hit the number and the thing she wanted to do. And she went to bodybuilding. And now she's transitioning to strongman and just applying the same level of tenacity that she has. But it was to your point, when somebody has an injury, the first thing they do is panic. And
Yeah.
when you're working with a coach, the first thing you're going to do, let's find the movement that doesn't hurt, that we can still train those muscles and come back to it when it's better. That's the difference between having a coach and not having a coach. Is the athlete who doesn't have it panics, freaks out, the world is over, and the coach says, "Here's our plan until." That's the difference.
Yeah, and I think that just troubleshooting and just like again, some stuff's going to work. Like I said, that happened to work extremely well. I'm sure there's been situations that it doesn't work out at that great, but if you have like a logical like solution, you try it. But in general, I think that if you can kind of just manage those pain symptoms and keep get some sort of training effect, and that's where I think some of like kind of the conjugate, like at least methodology and principles can be really helpful,
Yes.
because you're not like locked into having to do I have to do this movement. And that was something I kind of like also learned early on in my career with a lot of wrestlers. If you've ever worked with like combat athletes, grapplers and
Mhm.
stuff,
I
they're always
actually started that way.
yeah, they're always something's always like banged up, right? You're
Yeah, I started that way working with MMA athletes from American Top Team because I was in the area, and I was like, they want special privileges, they want these things, athletes, and they don't have any money. So I was like, this isn't going to work. So I got out of the strength conditioning field and into the strength sports. This all happened by accident, and it was never my intention to be an online coach. I was working with Gen Pop people, and I became known in my area as like the guy you go to when you have injuries or issues. He can work around things or help things, and then as I was competing in three different strength sports, strongman, powerlifting, and weightlifting, and jumping around weight classes, people were like, how are you doing this? And I was like, well, it's just simple. I just modified this, that, and the other thing. And they're like, can you do it for me? So for a while, I was doing it for free outside of my work for a bunch of people. And then it became consuming. I'm like, I got to charge you. This is costing me time. And the online thing just exploded. I ended up shutting down my gym because I didn't need it. I didn't need to be married to a facility every day. My entire work is remote. And it really wasn't intentional. I know nowadays, everyone after their second meet DM me for coaching in their bio. I was literally asked to do this. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll do this.
Well, I think that's a good like kind of takeaway for people listening to. Like sometimes like similar to you, where like I happened to like powerlifting was like my thing just because I felt like I wasn't going to be a good enough wrestler in college, so I just kind of elected to stay. I wanted to stay competitive though, and a lot of the wrestlers that I was training started to graduate, and they wanted something to train for. I'm like, hey, why don't you do this meet with me? And then kind of the rest is history. CrossFit happened. Whatever like caused the raw boom kind of happened. And then I had this like skill set that a lot of people didn't like have at the time, and kind of the rest is history. And now it's like kind of my main focus as well. But yeah, I think that if people are kind of like asking for it, if coaches aren't sure about like what products or services to offer, if people are like asking, you kind of mentioned about your mobility videos and some of your tutorials, we're getting a lot of engagement. So that's kind of maybe a clue. Okay, like maybe I'll do more of that and I'll kind of double down. So I think that's definitely good advice because I think sometimes people like they want to like have this sure like thing, but you kind of have to just say anything else. You analyze the data, you analyze the athlete performance, you see what's working, and then you kind of just rinse, repeat, do more of that. But I appreciate the time a lot. This has been great, and it's always good to see someone that's kind of been in it. Like I said, not that we're that old, but it's just like I said, this there's been a lot
It's
of
an
people.
evolving sport every few years. I start to feel old because I see so many new faces every year.
Yeah, so it's always good to see someone that's still like kind of around there, a few decades into it, and we're still kind of kicking. And sometimes like kind of we do a lot. We do a lot for a lot of people, but I think at the end of the day, it's because we love it and we want to help. So, where can people find you if they want to follow what you're doing or learn more about your coaching?
Easiest place is probably Instagram. I do, a lot of work through there because I have the most traction there. So it's at Jaffe Strength on Instagram. It's the same on YouTube. You can find it on there because I do shift some of the YouTube. Phil Drew, the MMA strength conditioning coach, is a friend of mine. He convinced me to start up a TikTok. So I only put educational stuff on TikTok, but I don't want to go on there because it's like for kids, but I just like I have it as like a backup. He's
Sure.
like, one day Instagram can crash. You need the backup. I'm like, all right. So I put him on there. But so I'm on YouTube, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook under my regular name, Trevor Jaffe. And before that, though, contacted me. You guys owe it to yourself if you've never actually done this, but go on T Nation and just put in the search and put in John's name because he was one of the first people, if I can recall, that was doing simplified conjugate programming for raw lifters, which was new at the time because all the conjugate information programming back then was multiplied. I remember reading it on like T Nation, I think like 2003, 2004. You're writing a lot of conjugate for raw because the only other person who was doing it was DeFranco, but he was doing it for athletics, West Side for Skinny Bastards, and you were doing it for the powerlifters. So there's a lot of great old information that you guys can go back and read there.
No, well, I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I know it's sometimes you kind of forget some of the things that you've done, and yeah, I think that was kind of like I want just kind of like you. I wanted to share my experiences, and then like again, outside of like Louis and and him specifically, Jesse Burdick was one of my mentors. Learned a lot from him, and still take a lot of his stuff. And I think that yeah, I think it's important, and that was something I felt like a need to just kind of like okay, like hey, just to kind of because I think Louis' information is great. I had his old VHS tapes and stuff, but unless you're kind of like really studied it for a long time, it could be kind of tough to like understand and then like, okay, like who is this for? And yeah,
Right.
so, I mean, and then, like I said, I think that, I don't know. And then for me, like, I don't know if you feel this way too, but sometimes I like to, I don't know. I've always kind of wanted to maybe go against the grain a little bit too. And I was like, a lot of people at the time were like, oh, this is only for equip. This is only for equip. That was kind of, I was
Right.
like, well, let's see if that's true, kind of thing. And then we
You
have,
make a phenomenal, yeah, before we finish, you make a phenomenal point because that's something I've talked about a lot. Like good mornings. Most raw lifters will avoid good mornings in current like DUP style systems, and they'll say the same things like, we're not in a good morning contest. But the funny thing is, if you go to a raw meet, 90% of people who lose a squat in a raw meet lose it in their back.
yeah.
And the good morning is training you for that chaos to overcome it. So it's like, and that's what Louis was talking about the entire time is like the good morning is your safety mechanism for a shitty squat. And the raw people have lost sight of that. They're like, well, we don't do that. We're not in gear. We're not sitting back. We're not hinging the same way. It's like, you don't understand the concept. It's to protect you when a shit goes wrong. You're training for chaos. So you're globally strong. So yes, you're 100% correct on that. Like people will dismiss it because they're not in gear. That doesn't apply. It's like, but he understood how to keep you upright if it was going wrong because it does in gear very fast. And so that transfers over and applies. That's a great example of what you just talked about.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate the time. Like I said, I'm looking forward to, hopefully run into you again in
Absolutely.
the next, training cycle or whatever it may be. Definitely give Trevor a follow. If this podcast helped you, please share it. Please give it a 5-star review. It helps other people find us. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, stay strong and we'll see you soon.